What's up? It's Bradley at Subsonic Skateboards. Today I'm going to show you how I install a enclosure and gasket on a deck for a electric DIY build. We're going to get our big boy pants on and our big boy voice. We're going to make this happen. I wanted to talk to you today about battery enclosures. And you might say, why do you need batteries? If you're building a DIY e-skate, we've got a great option for you to get you started on a solid platform that's going to let the rest of your build go as easily as possible. We currently have enclosures from eBoosted. They have kindly custom designed some enclosures for a few of our boards. Currently, we have one for the Spirit 30, one for the GT40, and one for the Century 40. These are super impressive if you ask me. I don't know how I could ever build something to this quality. One day I hope I can match Alan at eBoosted's quality of production here. It's amazing the level of graphic detail that he puts into them and the fit and finish. But for today, we're just gonna look at the Century 40. So let me put these two aside. And today, we're going to do a full enclosure install on a Century 40. Now, I wanted to make a quick note and show you some things that I've learned along the way, because I have screwed up a board or two in this process. And a mistake that I've made is using the wrong threaded inserts. So these here are way too long. They're made of brass and they're intended actually for softwood. And these are just the first thing that I could find. And I installed these in more than one board and the results were not great. And I wasn't really happy with it. So in the search for the perfect item, I found these. These are a stainless steel M4 threaded insert from EasyLock. If you'd like to know the exact part number, it's right here. I do have quite a few of these, just the threaded inserts in a 10-pack, or EasyLock does have a full kit with the right drill bit and a little installation bit, along with 10 of these threaded inserts. And this is something that we could offer on our website. If people are interested, let me know if this is something that you're looking for. So there's a couple different pieces that go into a full enclosure board assembly. We've got the deck, we've got the enclosure, we're gonna have all of our hardware, and then we need a gasket that's gonna seal the enclosure to the board. I've got two different materials I work with. One's a 1/16 of an inch thick, and the other's an 1/8 of an inch thick. And for our friends that use metric out there, this is about 1.7 millimeters thick, and this is about 3.4 millimeters thick. Obviously, this is gonna be twice the weight because it's twice the thickness. So if we can get away with the thinner material, that's gonna be our first choice. So we'll start with this, and if we see any gaps or we need a thicker gasket to have a proper install, then we'll go ahead with this one. So I'm gonna set this one aside for now. So the rubber sheet that I found is about 60A in diameter. It's fairly soft. I've just pre-cut this by hand to the shape of the enclosure. How I went about doing that is I rough cut it and then placed it between the board and the enclosure. That way I'm catching all those contours and I'm not cutting it too short. At that point, I just traced it with a Sharpie or pencil and then cut it out by hand. Now, it's important, the biggest challenge that we face when we do this is making sure that all the holes in all three pieces of material are lined up properly. And this is where it's really best to spend more time making sure you have everything aligned properly, you have everything secured before you start drilling any holes. So let's say that this did shift, so one of our pieces here moved mid-drill. That could be pretty difficult to recover from. So just to be safe, we're gonna put some masking tape on each end of the board here. That way we can mark the outline of the enclosure, and then we'll have a reference point in case anything shifts. And just like a lot of things, it's all about the prep work. The actual drilling and assembly isn't gonna take very long, but we're definitely gonna spend our time getting everything aligned properly the way that we want it. So we pretty much have this exactly where we want it. We're not completely committed to its location yet. And we need to figure out how we're gonna keep this all clamped in place. What I've seen people use from my research is simply just some rubber bands and then also some clamps. I'm gonna do both. The rubber bands are gonna help center everything, and that's what I'm gonna do first, and then I'm gonna lock it down in place with the clamps. So I'm gonna probably take 6 rubber bands here. And we're gonna go over the back of the board. I'm gonna go right there. And as you can see, we're working on a drop deck today, so we do have a gap here that makes this a lot easier. If you're working on a board that was relatively flat, some type of box or something to set this on would definitely be helpful. All right, so I've pretty much got this centered exactly where I want it to be. The rubber bands are helping keeping it centered this direction. I checked to make sure that from the nose to the tail, it's where I want it to be. And so now I'm gonna apply just some small spring clamps to lock this down in place. So now that I've put those clamps on, it has shifted slightly. When I put the clamp on this side, I push the enclosure to the other side. So we're gonna go ahead and just make our final little adjustments here. Make sure that we've got our enclosure centered in all directions. And this is a good time to check and see how our seal is doing. When I look, it looks like overall, we've got a good seal from the board to the enclosure with that rubber gasket. If you had big gaps that looks like it wasn't going to seal properly, I'd go with the thicker rubber that I have. So now is the somewhat daunting task. At this point forward, it's hard to go back. We're gonna start drilling holes through the enclosure and into the board. I went ahead and marked my 5 points on each side where I'm going to drill holes and place my hardware. We could offer some additional videos down the line on how to pick where to put them. I simply start with 1 in the center, 2 on the ends, and then for something long like this, I'm gonna put an additional 2 to make 5 on each side. So to start, I'm gonna use one of the smallest drill bits that I have, and all I want to do is go through the enclosure, through the gasket, and just maybe a millimeter or 2 into the board. I'm gonna make sure I don't go all the way through the board, because in the end, we're not actually gonna affect the top surface of the deck at all. So it's definitely worth taking your time here. You may want to use a punch or an awl to pre-mark where you're gonna drill. That way your drill bit doesn't shift. For me, I think I've got this down. We'll see. All right, so I've got all 10 of my pilot holes drilled. Now we're gonna disassemble this whole thing and we're gonna work on just the deck. Bring this fun, Jake. All right, so we've got 5 marks here on the board from when we did our pilot holes. I used a very small drill bit when I did that, and I'm gonna have to bump up the holes in both the enclosure and the gasket to fit the M4 hardware. But I did that for a reason, and that's because this little bit is smaller than the brad point on this drill bit. The other thing that I've done, I've got a stop here on this drill bit. So this is an adjustable stop because this drill bit is a unique size. I believe it's 17/64. So this is the drill bit that came with this Easy Drill kit that I've got. The other modification I did, I ground down the edges of this Easy Lock installation tool. That way I'm gonna be able to flush mount those threaded inserts right up into the deck and not have any overhang here on the surface. All right, so we have all of our holes drilled, and now it is time to insert some threaded inserts. These Easy Lock inserts that I have, they come with this little tool like we talked about before, and that perfectly grabs these little slot on the top and allows you to drive that in. And as I mentioned before, something that I did, we compare this brand new kit. This one has a complete straight edge up to it, and I noticed that that limited my ability to completely drive that threaded insert flush. So I took mine to a bench grinder and just put a little bit of a chamfer on it there. That way I'm able to completely flush those inserts into the deck. When I drilled the board, I had my drill on its drill setting and the higher speed setting. When I put these in, I'm gonna wanna do it slower, that way I don't strip out the threads. And at a certain point, I want the torque to stop and I want the drill to stop for me. So I've put my drill on the lower speed setting and I've turned down the torque setting. All right, so we've got all of our threaded inserts installed. Now I'm going to remove this tape once all my drilling is done. For now, I'm going to set the board aside. We need to open up the holes on this enclosure so that they will fit one of our M4 bolts. Let me grab my larger drill bit here, put our threaded insert installer away, and I'm just going to open up each one of these holes. Alright, so we've got all our holes prepped in both the board and the enclosure. The last step is to open up the holes in the gasket here. And to do that, I'm just going to use a small hole punch. You could use a drill bit, and I don't think you get as clean of a cut. Alright, so all those are punched out. You may notice this is a full sheet. We haven't cut the inside out yet. That's one of the last steps that I'm going to do, just so I have as much material to work with and make adjustments if needed. So now we can grab our enclosure, our gasket, and line everything up. And I've tried a couple different lengths of screws, and I found that a 16 millimeter is usually the best option, but I have both 12 and 20 millimeter screws as well. Just depending on the board, the enclosure, and what size gasket we use. Different lengths are preferable. So now we've got our gasket and our enclosure together. We can go ahead and start to line up our hardware here, and I want to just barely attach each screw. Alright, so I've got all of the screws into the threaded inserts. I just have them threaded in, they're not snug down. And before I go and tighten one down super tight and then try to do the other one, I'm going to work my way back and forth across, slowly tightening them up, that way I get even pressure. Alright, well that wraps up our installation of a gasket and enclosure on a Century 40. As we can see, there's no intrusions or anything on the surface of the board, no cracks. You can't tell anything as far as from the top of the board that there's any hardware installed. Now I'm going to take this whole thing apart, clean every part so there's no dust, no pieces of sawdust or fiberglass, and then the deck is actually going to go back into the spray booth one more time to get a final clear coat. Then I'll reassemble, and this is getting shipped off to, I believe it's David in New Hampshire. If you've got any questions, feel free to comment below, send us an email, and we're always happy to help you figure out what the next deck is for your custom build. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, my name is Bradley here at Subsonic Skateboards. Ride safe, wear a helmet, have fun.
Just